What if everything you thought you knew about the Crusades was a curated illusion? What if there was a campaign erased from most chronicles, redacted by papal decree, that held the key to all the contradictions? A crusade not of valor and faith, but of betrayal, hidden alliances, secret letters, and vanished armies. What if the most important war of Christendom wasn't fought in Jerusalem, but buried beneath centuries of silence? So settle in. Let the dust of distant centuries settle over your skin. Let the noise of modern memory fade to quiet. Because the stories we're about to unearth, well, they weren't meant to survive. You've heard of the Crusades, of course. The clash of civilizations, the knights in polished mail, crosses painted in blood and righteousness. But behind the paintings, behind the sermons, something else waits. Something quieter, stranger, more human. Because for every holy war sung in church halls, there was another left to rot in forgotten scrolls. A different kind of war, still wrapped in parchment, still sealed with wax and fear. A war that didn't fit the story the victors wanted to tell. And that's where we begin. Not with the charge of steel against scimitar, not with the roar of holy banners flapping in the Levantine sun, but with something far more unsettling. A letter, a name crossed out, a whisper carried from Acre to Rome and never spoken aloud again. This isn't a tale of glory. It's a tapestry of questions, forgotten pacts, silent orders, crusaders who never returned and were never listed among the dead. Because the true mystery of the Crusades isn't what they conquered. It's what they tried to bury. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe, so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. You probably think you know how the First Crusade began. A fiery sermon in a French field. A pope raising his arms to heaven. A crowd erupting in chants of Deus Vult, and in many ways that did happen. Urban II's call at the Council of Clermont in 1095 is well documented, carved into the memory of Europe like a holy brand. He spoke of defending Christendom, rescuing Jerusalem, and protecting pilgrims from Saracen brutality. That version, the clean one, became the official story. But buried in the Vatican's lesser-known registries, and scattered in marginalia from remote abbeys, there are whispers of a different script. One that suggests the Church had more than salvation on its mind. A papal courier arrived in southern Italy months before Clermont bearing sealed scrolls addressed to Norman warlords, men who had carved out territories through blood and cunning. These letters were not proclamations of faith, but offers of land legitimacy and absolution if they agreed to fight in a war not yet declared. The language was careful but unmistakable. Rome would support their conquests in exchange for loyalty on a coming campaign. It wasn't a sermon, it was a deal. The First Crusade may have been born not from divine inspiration, but from pre-negotiated alliances, a coordinated effort to expand church influence while framing it as holy retribution. This raises the question, did Urban II know that framing the crusade as a spiritual mission would generate more fervor than admitting it was a calculated political maneuver? One curious document held in the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana and rarely cited outlines not just the itinerary for Urban's journey through France, but also the audience composition of each stop. In nearly every case, he met first with local lords behind closed doors. The masses only heard the rallying speech afterward. Faith was the stage. Power moved behind the curtain, and it worked. Knights who were once rivals rode under the same cross, some of them promising to serve for years in exchange for pardons or promises of land in the Levant. Among them was Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman prince already excommunicated once, who miraculously found redemption in a crusade that just happened to restore his claim over territories lost in the Balkans. divine intervention, or carefully crafted redemption arc. Historians like to argue whether the Crusades were a genuine spiritual awakening or a cleverly disguised land grab. But maybe it was both. Maybe the brilliance of Urban II lay in knowing that men will fight for God, but they'll fight harder for gold titles and second chances. The secret letters, though scarce and fragmentary, offer tantalizing clues, lines referencing Sacri Compendia Holy Compensation, references to concessiones terrarum territorial concessions, and most tellingly, an advisory that the Church must not bear the sword, but direct its righteous arc. Elegant, isn't it? The Church wouldn't shed blood, it would guide those who did. It's hard not to recall the later doctrine of just war, where theologians bent philosophy into a blade carving out moral space for violence under divine sanction. But this manipulation began long before Aquinas put pen to parchment. It began with papal emissaries riding hard across Europe sowing the seeds of war in the name of heaven and promising earthly harvests in return. Curiously, this entire mechanism was hidden behind a phrase that appears in nearly every surviving Crusade sermon, the will of God made manifest. It's such a convenient shield, isn't it, the will of God? Who can argue with that? But when those sermons were delivered beside feasting tables and freshly inked contracts, one begins to suspect that God's will might have had a ghostwriter. What's even more unsettling is how well the papal court controlled the flow of information. Chroniclers like Fulcher of Chartres, who traveled with the Crusade, wrote accounts so glowing they bordered on celestial PR. Other voices, like that of the monk Guibert de Nogent, strayed closer to the edge, hinting at contradictions, but always pulling back just before they said too much. And those who didn't pull back, their works disappeared. Scribes miscopied their texts. Archives lost them in fires that seemed almost too timely. And yet a few slivers remain, like the charter in the Abbey of Monte Cassino that records a mysterious donation from a hand of Rome to fund armor and transport before the First Crusade had even been publicly announced. You have to ask yourself, why was Rome funding arms shipments before the Holy War was declared? Why were knights already preparing to march before the call had even rung from Clermont? And if that's true, if the war was pre-planned and choreographed, then what else about the Crusades have we mistaken for divine providence when it was in